So we all know how difficult it is when it comes to the job search right now in any industry. And we're going to go through some examples of someone who's going through a job search. You can see on your screen Anastasia K. And she worked around data analytics and jobs around the tech industry. Now, what we're going to learn from her here is that when you have consistent effort to find what you want, that's kind of the best approach to take rather than rushing, being desperate. And this is the situation that many people find themselves in actually. We have a career coaching program where if you want to avoid some of the problems people are having in their job search right now that are quite difficult, reach out to me for some career coaching, right? I will help you avoid a lot of the problems we're seeing rather than getting dragged into a 6-month job interview process or job search process where you can't find what you want and you can't find something that matches exactly what your future goals are. And that's what I see a lot of people doing. They're just going for anything. So I'll personally create a personalized plan for you and work with you one-to-one over a coaching program to help you build more power, pay, and freedom. And that's the link in description. So let's listen to her story here.
In 2024, I slowly started looking again, but this time I approached things a little bit differently. For the second round of job hunting, I switched strategies and focused on bigger companies, and specifically IC roles in data science and product analytics. So similar type of roles as before, individual contributor roles in those companies. This time I tracked where I've applied and what kind of response rate I had. So I think from October to November, I applied to 10 roles online. 2 of those were referrals, and they were quite important because those 2 were the biggest companies and most promising ones. I got 5 responses, so 5 replies from companies, both of those referrals included. I interviewed at 4 companies up to the final round. One of them was just a slow one, so it just fell off. I ended up with 3 offers, and one of them was okay. 2 were much better, so I chose one of these. Reflecting back, it sounds like a nice timeline or a nice process for me, especially comparing to how it typically is in this job market. It's very challenging for everyone, but actually it was so stressful, and mostly because of the timeline problems. So the bigger the company, the longer the process for getting hired there. And some processes have dragged out on for months, while other companies were interviewing me for about 2-3 weeks and they were ready to give me an offer quite fast. It may sound kind of nice on paper because I didn't apply to 1,000 companies and only got 3 replies, but it was still much worse than ever before in terms of the hiring process. I'll tell you in a bit what are the things that I did that I think made it easier for me to go for this job market this time. But first, let's talk about the differences between what's it like to look for a job in data analytics and tech in general, I think, in 2024 and 25 versus 5 years ago in 2020 when things were a bit rosier. First things first is, of course, availability of roles. There are fewer roles in 25 than ever before. In 2020, there were more roles, more variety of levels that you could apply to. Companies were way more open to training and hiring across different experience levels. So hiring a junior or hiring a more senior person to a less senior role. In 25, there's fewer openings, obviously, higher experience requirements, and a cumbersome hiring process. Some companies post the same roles over and over, so you've heard about that, those ghost jobs that are not actually for hiring people, mostly for, collecting resumes or giving people false hope, never leading anywhere. Since I've seen this market for the whole year, I've really noticed some companies in Sweden and Stockholm which open the same role over and over again. And even though I might be super fast applying there and a really good fit, and never got a reply. At the same time, companies really want senior level skills for mid-level salaries, so they're hesitant to hire overqualified people. They also don't want to pay you too much, and they also want you to check all the boxes ever, which is a very weird and challenging approach. Second big difference is the interview process itself. So there's more interview rounds, there's more tests, and there's seemingly absolutely zero trust in the candidate. In 2020 and before, there were faster timelines, reasonable-ish take-home tests, and a bit clearer expectations. So if a company saw that they wanted you, they really tried to move quickly through the process. Now, interviewing feels like a full-time job. It's an endurance test. There's more rounds, more hoops to jump through. Companies hire candidates less than ever, and they trust candidates less than ever. And it's not just technical challenges anymore. So you might have a online coding interview, a take-home assignment, but also on your own time, you'll have to do a personality test, an aptitude test, or a logic exam online, which will also take a couple of hours of your time. And some of them are really hard. And there is a whole industry of courses to prepare to those tests, which is quite intense. One company that I've interviewed at put me through a 1-hour test on number comprehension, graph interpretation, and scheduling meetings in busy people's calendars, tasks, stuff that's very interesting to ask of a person with 8 years of experience working in data and analytics, which feels like they completely distrust applicant experience that you write on CV. Even for a senior role where you have a master's degree and 8 years of experience, you have to prove that you know how to calculate percentages. I don't know if that's reflective of people who apply to the jobs more than maybe the company's distrust, but still, that wasn't the very pleasant part of the process that you have to go through. Now moving to compensation and offers. There's much less pay now offered. There's fewer perks. There's less companies interested in your growth within the role. So before you could job hop and significantly increase your salary, you could have a better benefits, better stock options, better bonuses, better flexibility. Now salaries are kind of stagnant at 2021, 2022 levels. Companies are cutting perks, limiting growth within the company, and definitely removing flexibility. Remote working, it's not really an option anymore. The biggest changes I saw that there is a lower baseline and lower base level of salaries for senior roles. Very little stock or bonuses. So even startups, they don't really have giving you any bonuses. Companies don't really emphasize progression anymore. They want to hire you for this specific role and then want you to stay there for as long as possible. So in the end, it kind of feels that companies want not just experienced people, but the perfect person for this role, the perfect candidate, the one that 100,000% fit, and yet they don't want to pay a premium for that. At the same time, they're really scared of hiring overqualified people. Now more.
Sure. Now, before we move on, there's many things we can learn here, right? Something that stood out to me in this was that, firstly, to give you a bit of context, I covered a bit of this video in another video a few weeks ago, and this is the second part of a job search. She was searching for a job for several months at the start of 2024 and then later in 2024. I think the key things here to learn from is there's so many common themes that you see across society that are coming up here. Firstly, there's a lack of trust, right? So the lack of trust you see throughout society, people mistrusting each other. You see it in the job market. She's talking about how companies are interviewing people, but they're asking them to do all these extra tests. And it's probably because, people are interviewing and there's a flooded job market with tons of people, some who are good, some who might be average, and they're pretending to know more than they can do. And that's why all these companies are testing people, the same way you see that a lot of mistrust broadly in society. The other thing is she mentioned how there's not as many senior roles, or they want people to have senior level skills, but at the mid-level and the middle level of salaries, right? So it's just kind of this common theme of people not being able to progress in their life, not just economically or socially in their career, is becoming quite difficult. And this is why I try to work with my clients to find unique solutions for what they need and how to pivot their career in the right direction. I think the same way companies are having higher standards, over time, I know it's a rough job market right now, but have higher standards for what you want. Not only just how you conduct yourself, maybe your skill development, learning new coding skills could be an option, but also how to leverage your skills and experience to give you the lifestyle you want, right? Sometimes I talk about on my channel, people moving from London to Dubai to do the same job for more money and less tax, significant drop in tax from 40% income tax to 5% or 0% income tax. And then they've got other cases whereby people will think, oh, well, maybe if I pivot my career slightly, right? People going from tech careers and they're dealing with a layoff to working in a tech role in a tech department in finance, in a hedge fund, in a private equity firm, and that will give them a much higher salary or a similar level high salary as the tech industry, and they might have more flexibility to work from home, right? Or they might have learn a brand new skill set and they've opened up a whole new avenue to making income. They could always go back to the tech industry or stay in the finance industry, working in the tech department. That could involve various things, working in the tech help desk, managing the trading systems and the tech issues that can occur when it comes to trading activity. It could be managing the back end and just helping new joiners on board when it comes to using the company systems. So there's all sorts of ways you can pivot your career by thinking a bit outside the box. Something she also said here is dealing with this roller coaster, right? Of the emotional roller coaster of doing a lot of job searching, right? Because this is the reality for a lot of us when you're going through a job search, whereby you have to essentially put so much time and effort in that it can be quite draining. It's like going through speed dating or going through dealing with very difficult people in general. Because when you're going through an interview, you're putting yourself forward. It's like forming new friends or forming new connections, and you're trying to present yourself in the best way, and you get rejected or you get ghosted, right? Which is a bit annoying and ridiculous. The other thing is around the whole concept of just keeping pushing throughout that particular scenario, right? And you unlock new levels of determination and commitment to what you want, right? So when I've left companies in the past and moved from one to the other, sometimes there'd been like a gap of 1 to 2 months where I'm still interviewing for my next opportunity. After leaving a company that I didn't want to work there, I've kind of maxed out my experience. I didn't mind having a bit of a gap in my CV of 1 to 3 months. It wasn't a big deal. I was already actively interviewing for other opportunities. But you have a new level of determination. There's something about being out of the job market that really makes you think about your self-sufficiency, being more independent, not spending money, kind of focusing on your freedom, right? Because that autonomy you have, the power you have being self-employed or even unemployed, and you're looking for your next opportunity, you really feel in control. When you're working for a company, you kind of feel less in control of your destiny. It's kind of weird how that works. But there's a key phrase or key quote that I heard on a song recently by Stanley, and he said there's a correlation between self-respect and endurance. And I remember that, and I think about that a lot, right? Whether it's with me making YouTube videos, this can be quite difficult sometimes. I'm getting new clients, I'm spending a lot of time editing videos, coming up with new ideas. And there's a lot of endurance required there. When you're going through a job search, there's a lot of endurance there when you are switching from one job to the other, doing a ton of job interviews, ton of job applications, and it's easy to give up or feel like you should give up. What's the point? The economy's screwed. Maybe the hiring process could be biased against you, maybe based on your race or your gender if you're a man, for example, or the DEI metrics. You might think, oh, well, I'm never going to find a job, or I'm never going to get a good job. I just end up with an average one that doesn't really pay too well. But I think then what keeps you motivated in that scenario, when you know the system's against you, when you know things are really being rigged a certain way, what keeps you going is self-respect, because that gives you the endurance. So I deserve better and I want better and I'm going to push for better for me, not for the company, not for the prestige of a job position and a job title, but because I want a higher living standard or because I want to achieve certain longer term life goals. Whatever that could be, doing property, investing more in stocks, or maybe taking a longer gap year, maybe later in your career. So this is the thing that keeps you going, is that self-respect. That's what keeps endurance going. And that's when I think about so many other aspects of life. Why do you keep pushing? And it's self-respect. So I'll just remind you of that quote because I actually have it written on a whiteboard and it keeps me going. It says there's a correlation between self-respect and endurance. Right? So just remember that. So if we keep going through this, right, many people feel stuck in the middle of society, not just in the middle class, where they can't progress and develop their wealth, but people feel stuck in the middle of their career, stuck in middle management, right? And they're maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, and they really aren't moving forward. Maybe they think, oh, I'm going to quickly climb the corporate ladder, but they end up just stuck at the same level. In the finance industry, this is quite common, where people are stuck at the vice president level. It sounds like a very senior role, but it's actually not. It's typically middle management type of level. And they just end up stuck there for years, and they could spend decades stuck at vice president level, maybe at different banks, but they don't really progress until they're in their 40s, and then maybe they make it one level up, and it's very late in their career at that stage to do that, and the salary increase won't really keep up with the rate of inflation, or maybe their lifestyle's gone up when they have a family and kids, and that salary increase, they really need it. It's not going to be a massive income boost. So this is the reality of the job search in many cases, and she's been quite honest with her approach here. The thing is, now all these interviews, you have to do so much prep for that, and I help again throughout my coaching to help with a lot of this detailed interview preparation, because they're testing all types of things in the job market now, right? It's not just, oh, answer a few technical skills, do you have some social skills? They're doing really in-depth testing. So I try to help my clients with a lot of those interview preparation skills that they need, right? It's almost like a full-time job trying to find your next job. Now, the thing is also with stagnant salaries, right? Salaries aren't increasing as much. There's RTO, return to the office, less work from home. So it's putting people in a difficult position when they are looking to save that money, but it's like they can't work from home, so they have to pay to commute, to go to work, to go to these interviews too. It is quite difficult, right? So let's continue to listen to another expert in this case, and this is Eli from Eli the Computer Guy. Let's listen to his perspectives. And what he's going to point out here is what skills you're developing and how skill development is quite important.
Is making sure your skills are up to snuff. All right, if you've had a good job in the past 10, 50, or 10 years, 5, 10 years, doing Ruby on Rails, right? Again, whatever job pays you, do it. I'm pretty technology agnostic. Again, I just hate JavaScript. I passionately hate JavaScript, but that's just me, right? But anything else, I'm pretty agnostic on, right? I'm not snarking on you for knowing Ruby on Rails, being a Ruby on Rails professional. But think about this. As we go into this economic idiocy, is this the time that you might want to learn JavaScript? Is this the time you might want to learn Node.js or Python or AI or something else? Actually get your skills and your resume up to snuff. When you sit there and you look at your resume, does your resume look like something that's appropriate for 2025, or does it look like something that's appropriate for 2020? Right? And if it looks like it's 5 years behind, again, go and start boning up on things, working on side projects. So again, if you do get laid off or layoffs are coming to your company, maybe you can lateral over, do that type of thing. These are the types of things that I would really think about.
So that's a brief clip, but that's the important thing, skill development. The job market's changing, but have you changed with the job market? She mentioned in her earlier clip where the job market was much more hot in the tech industry, easy to get jobs, high paying jobs. Now the job market's extremely tough in the tech industry particularly. It's completely changed. There's more demand for skills. Have you been increasing and improving your skills over that time, or are you outdated for the job market? That's why it's important, and again, I help through coaching with this, looking at your resume, looking at where the job market is, and if there's a mismatch there, do you need to do some skill development? Some of this you can do for lower cost through online courses, other things you could do through professional qualifications. So it does vary, right? What are the new skills? What are the in-demand skills? Where's your industry trending, right? For example, I mentioned on my channel many times that doing an MBA costs a lot of money, doesn't necessarily increase your income a lot, so think carefully about that. And the other thing would be, you've got people who have done a lot of other professional qualifications that aren't really helping increase their income. So you've got to think carefully about what exactly skills you're developing. And a funny example of this would be, there was lots of talk about DEI and ESG, right? ESG is the whole climate agenda. We'll just leave it at that. And the controlling everyone. Oh, you shouldn't catch flights. You shouldn't eat meat. You shouldn't drink milk because it's bad for the environment. All of that type of nonsense. Now, a lot of the big banks were colluding on this, or they were working on the framework for carbon credits and how much people could fly, or how they could basically add a ESG score to different companies and different purchases and all types of crazy dystopian nonsense. But all rating companies and their products by how climate friendly they were. Now, loads of people went into ESG in the finance industry, right? And major investment banks places I've worked and things like that. And these were growing departments. People think, oh, this is the next big thing. A bit like crypto over a decade ago. People are like, oh, the next big thing is the environment, climate change, and all the related carbon credits, any type of thing around that. Now you see when Trump's come in, right, the regime, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, behind the scenes have changed. They don't really want DEI anymore. They don't want ESG. They don't want this focus on climate change, even though you see a bit of it in the news still in the UK and things like that. So now what are they doing? They've changed the narrative, and they're actually firing a lot of people in sustainability and ESG type of roles. And I know people like that, and very senior people who are on the board of HSBC. I've covered it in another video. The chief sustainability officer, ESG officer at HSBC, who is probably on a very high six-figure salary on the board of HSBC, a major European investment bank, he lost his job, right? Because all of a sudden that's not the trend now, right? Maybe BlackRock and ESG and whatever the narrative is there, they want to change it to something else, right? Maybe there's a global conflict coming up. The point there is that be aware of the trend and the long-term sustainability of it, right? You don't want to be this guy who's just trend hopping and being like, oh, crypto's the thing, I'll jump into crypto. Oh, the price of Bitcoin's gone down, now I'll jump into ESG. And then you have a layoff and then you're not sure what to do in your career. So be a bit more strategic about some of that job hopping and the skill development that you're engaged in, right? So now we're going to go back to her story. Anna, let's see what she has to say. I think this might be the longest I've ever listened to a woman speak.
A controversial take a little bit, but I only applied for roles that I actually saw myself as a perfect fit. Some advices out there suggest that you need to apply to thousands of roles, everything that's remotely relevant, but I chose to apply to roles where if I were the hiring manager, I'd hire myself. So my skills had to match the job description very well, not just like vaguely fit. And why this worked for me is because I had a really good response rate. I wasted much less time on doing all these applications and answering questionnaires. And I had better quality of interviews for me because I was very confident when I was interviewing for a role. Second tip, which will work for everyone, is that referrals are more important than ever. They were already pretty important before, especially if you wanted to get a really cool company. But now it's so crucial to get a direct contact to a recruiter or connect through a person who works in this company to get noticed. Obviously, that does not mean that you will get hired or that your interview process will be faster. But with thousands of people applying for the same role, if you get a referral, you have a chance to at least get noticed by a recruiter, and at least they will read your resume at least once. Third tip that really helped my mental health mostly is giving absolutely not a second thought on any rejection or ghosting. I stopped asking companies for feedback after they tell me we wanted to go with another candidate because, first of all, they are completely not incentivized to give you any useful feedback due to legal concerns. So they will never give you an open feedback on what they didn't like in your interview process. If they do, it's often very random, so it depends more on whether the interviewer had a lunch or had a shitty meeting before interviewing you. You can't really change anything in your behavior based off of this feedback, and you will just feel worse for it. There's absolutely no action that you can do on any interview feedback. So I decided to never waste any energy on ruminating on it, just moving on immediately. Another tip or another point that really worked for me, and I think that might actually work for others too, is I was specifically focusing on the companies and teams within the companies with proven value. So now companies are hiring less for research or nice to have this amount of data scientists in their company. They're hiring for immediate business impact. And that means that if you find the revenue generating teams, they are more future proof against layoffs, against firing people. You're just going to be more valuable to the company if you're contributing to generating revenue. If the role was in some team that builds internal tools, has a weird uncertain project, that was kind of more of a red flag for me. And I deprioritized those roles when I was looking for a job. The last point, which is a bit of a controversial take as well, is that I decided to not use AI for creating my CV or cover letter at all. I tried it in the beginning and I dropped it. AI generated applications are so easy to spot. And if you spend time editing your application, your CV or cover letter to sound natural, then you're just better off writing it yourself.
So, a couple of things to learn here. The first most important point here from Anastasia is that you're being aware of what the role is in the company in relation to how they make money, right? Because you don't want to be in like a back office role unless that's the only thing you can get. You want to be close to the money, right? Even if you're not in the revenue generating team, like the front office of the sales team, if you're somewhat close to that, maybe you're working in a tech department that's supporting sales, that's kind of good because they'll be more demanding to hire people there, and it's more essential and core to the company making money that you're close to that revenue generating team, right? Whether if you're on some back office, middle office kind of role, and it's like she says, generic, vague, it's just the general team they need to help run the company, those people are more likely to lose their job, right? Because they really will think, well, actually they're just doing a lot of administrative work, some kind of vague generic business strategy work. Try and be as close as you can to what's actually making money. So that's important. The other thing is, you mentioned using referrals. That's very important to consider if you do have friends in your professional network. And I understand many times on the channel, we talk about how co-workers aren't your friends. Companies talk about how they're your family when they're not. And obviously there needs to be a clear professional boundary there, but keeping in touch with people throughout your industry or throughout your career that you've got on decent terms with, maybe checking in on them every few months on a LinkedIn message, that's worthwhile doing, because you never know, they might switch banks or switch companies every couple of years, and at least there'll be a contact you that you can maybe put in a good word for you or provide some kind of positive recommendation to a hiring manager at that company, right? And the other thing is, I agree with her feedback around AI, right? I've seen people write their resumes with AI and it's full of mistakes and it comes across kind of awkward and clunky. And that's why when I'm working as a career coach, I rewrite someone's resume from scratch to make sure it's tailor-made for what they want and the direction they're heading in. So I do agree with her point there, right? And the other thing is, it's a very tricky one after you've done an interview, maybe several rounds of interviews at a company, and then you got rejected, and then you ask them why, right? And in a nice way, I just want to learn for my own self-development and improving my professional skills, and they don't give you an answer, right? Because it's sometimes you never know what's going on there. And like she says, it's probably best not to ask for feedback. It depends on the scenario, but generally speaking, if they don't like you for whatever reason, they're not inclined to really give you an honest reason, and they don't want to burn a bridge with you. You never know, they might look to hire you again. You might be working at another company and looking to hire someone from their company. They just don't want to get into that tedious thing or the kind of uncomfortable thing where they have to provide negative feedback for you and they haven't even hired you. It's not like you're a performance review and you're an employee there. It's like you're an interviewee, that you're a stranger. They're not inclined to give you helpful feedback to help your interview skills. So sometimes it makes sense not to do it. What's funny to me is I remember earlier in my career interviewing at a private equity firm, and before I went back into an investment banking role. And then when I was leaving the investment bank, I interviewed again at that private equity firm. Now, the first time I interviewed there, 5 or 6 interviews, went through all their rounds of interviews, completed the case study and everything, and got to the right final interview with the final boss. And he just didn't like me, but I got on with everyone else up to that point. So right at that last moment, they didn't give me a job offer because he just, I don't know, he seemed kind of argumentative with me in the interview. And it's like I didn't do anything wrong and everyone seems to like me apart from this one guy who manages the team. But what was good is I went through all those rounds of interviews and I learned a lot about private equity in terms of the interview process and the case studies and things like that. But then several years after that, I did an interview there and they completely changed the team. And this is one thing to look out for, right? With a lot of these smaller companies, startups, things like that, they're very quick to fire people. So they must have fired in that couple years gap, right, where I interviewed again, let's just say 3 years roughly. They'd fired everyone in that particular department and team. And I was interviewing with them, completely brand new people who seemed a lot less experienced. And the question always rises, why is there high rate of turnover, right? And I don't know if they fired them or they left on their own accord. I don't know all the internal politics, but it's interesting. That was a red flag to me. Well, literally no one from the previous department who used to be here is here. So what's gone on? Has there been a scandal internally? Did they want to get rid of them because they don't like managing their financial risk a particular way? But then after 1 or 2 rounds of interviews, it didn't progress. And it could be a personality thing. It wasn't a skill thing, because I went through their previous interview process exactly before. It hadn't changed. All that had changed was the people. So you can't really take it personally. One time I made it right to the final round, almost got a job offer. Second time, after 1 to 2 interviews, they just stopped communicating with me. And I asked for feedback when I called up their HR a few days after the second interview or something like that, and they just said, oh, we can't provide feedback, we don't want to provide feedback. I said, oh. But a lot of it's not in your power. You don't really need to get upset and worked up about all of these awkward people in their interviews, right? Now, let's learn from some interesting quotes on Twitter. Shariah here, right, who is posting as a software engineer, she says, this is one of the developers who made TypeScript 10 times faster, and he just got laid off by Microsoft. There will be countless stories like this of engineers who went above and beyond, shipped game-changing features, improved dev experience for millions, and still found themselves out of a job. This week's Microsoft laid off 6,000 employees, roughly 3% of their workforce, not because they underperformed, not because they didn't deliver, but because AI just got good enough to replace thousands overnight. It's a bitter reminder that no matter how hard you work, a company can just get rid of you and say they're doing what's best for business. What's important for you to do is to build your network, keep your options open, protect your peace, because loyalty is admirable, but so is self-preservation. No one is going to look out for your career like you will. Here we've got here Ron Buckington, who's the example mentioned here, who worked at Microsoft for 18 years, and then he lost his job essentially, right? So after he introduced this 10 times faster system. So she's making a good point here, how people can lose their job. No one is irreplaceable. Even someone who's experienced, been there for, as she said here, was over 10 years, right? How long was he here? 18 years at Microsoft, they just fire him like disposable asset and just throw him out the office, right? You're an expense, you're an Excel line item. Companies don't very much value you. That's why you shouldn't value them, right? When it's convenient for them, they say we're family. And then when it's convenient for them, we say, oh, it's nothing personal, it's just business, right? So it's like an abusive relationship where it's one-sided loyalty that they demand from you. Now, the thing is, that's why I always be careful about the effort I'm putting in at work, right? In terms of they're going to demand so much from you, but there's diminishing returns from what you're getting. Not only in terms of the salary, because salaries aren't keeping up with inflation, but also they expect more and more for you, and you're getting less and less pay increases, less and less commitment from them, right? In a sense, there's diminishing returns when you stay there past a certain point, right? I would say if you spend an extremely long time, which I would say is 5 years and above at a company, and you're not really getting a lot of benefits, you could be getting those benefits. You could be getting massive pay rises and bonuses and guaranteed job security. But when you start getting up there, like 10 years at there, 15 years there, firstly, your salary is definitely not keeping up with the market rate, whatever the market salary is. They're keeping you there out of a full sense that you and them have a loyal agreement to keep working with each other. But also, you stagnate in your skills. You're not aware of the latest company cultures going on at other companies. It makes sense to job hop there. And if you spend 18 years at Microsoft, yes, a top company, yes, it's good because Microsoft on your resume will help. But you could have Microsoft on your resume for 5 years, for 10 years, right? And then if you have to job hop after, or find another job after a layoff after 18 years at one company, you're really going to be very stagnant in terms of the job interview process, finding a senior role at another company. That's why you've got to think carefully about what's your long-term strategy here. Why maybe he could have considered self-employment halfway through that, or now. How much has he saved and invested? So you've got to play the long game and be strategic about it. Now, the real red flag here is being ready to move on, right? Because many people, they get stagnant, particularly at the senior middle management levels. They're like, well, this is as good as it gets, right? Whatever the salary is. And I think in some senses, it could be a lot of ageism. If you're 45 and above and you try to job hop, of course you can find some opportunities, but there's less at those more experienced levels. So you might just want to ride out the position you have until maybe they keep you for another 5 years or more, 10 years, and then you have a layoff. But what are you doing in the meantime? Are you building a side hustle? Are you building other skills? Maybe in a different industry. If you have tech skills, are you building skills outside of tech? Whatever that could be, sales, annual labor type of skills, whatever it could be, just giving some random ideas there. Web development skills. And also you need to think about, you don't want to be stuck, right? This is the thing. If you're not progressing and you're stuck at a particular level, yes, on one hand, it's safe, particularly if you're at a high salary and you are investing quite a lot. But the other case is, well, if this rug gets pulled from up under me, what would I do next, right? And how quickly could I find that next opportunity? At a different points in his career, 10 years at Microsoft, 15 years at Microsoft, coming up to 18 years. Surely he's been there enough. He must have seen the signs of maybe if I'm dealing with a layoff, how would I handle that? And maybe he will be in a good position, but it's good to not get complacent in your career, right? And get happy that, oh, this company's just going to keep me on forever. I get on well with everyone. Things can actually end up quite badly over time. It could be a side hustle. You just need to start planning ahead. And these are all the type of things I help with throughout my career coaching. You should always be ready to move on. Now, if we move on to this, we have Bucko Capital, which posts some kind of funny info about tech industry and just jobs in general. And here we've got him talking about the Amazon layoffs. Andy Jassy, who's the Amazon CEO, emailed Amazon employees today to say we expect we will be reducing our workforce as we get efficiencies using AI. So this is an interesting here. He's talking about how we've got more AI agents at Amazon. We're going to be hiring less people because we know over time they will make things more efficient. So what's also interesting here is if we move from Amazon to Microsoft, what's going on with Microsoft, right? So Microsoft, they have improved their processes and efficiencies, and they had this whole get fit process, right? What is get fit? So firstly, zero interest rate policy was coming to an end around January 2022, as you can see from this graph, which means you're going to be less willing to borrow money because they're going to have to pay a higher interest rate. So they're going to be less willing to invest and some risk in terms of growing their business. And throughout the get fit process is just another way of saying from Jan 2022 to July 2023, roughly, what they were doing is essentially making things more efficient so they can hire less, right? So they've done many things in recent years. They would have had a get fit phase where they're making things more efficient from like 2022 to cost cutting, job reductions. And then they also went through doing more with less. That's something the CEO, Satya, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, was talking about entering a phase of doing more with less, right? So they were talking about AI integration, cloud efficiency, streamlining operations, investments shifting to generative AI with non-core projects trimmed. They find so many different ways of saying we're going to have layoffs, like fewer useless meetings, fewer layers of management, right? However they want to talk about it, it's always another way of saying, okay, we're going to cut jobs. So that's what ends up happening here. Then they end up going through the AI phase after they do the get fit phase, where they have some shifts in terms of slowing hiring, making things more efficient, and they're essentially doing more with less, right? So what's interesting here, I just want to point out here, if we go through the AI phase, which would roughly July 2023 to current date, right? So what they have is they have a decrease in their employee count, but their employee count goes up during the middle of the AI phase. Now, there's different ideas around this. Are they doing this because they need more tech skills to work and develop those AI tools? There could be other reasons for it. But the point is, I don't like all the hype that AI is just taking all the jobs. Yes, it's going to make things more efficient in the short term, and then over the medium to long term, I think there'll be more unemployment. But just blaming every job loss on AI is a bit ridiculous. And I think lots of people, they get caught up in one hype or the other. It's like when you see these red pill guys and they blame everything on women, and then or feminists who blame everything on men, people in the kind of job market blame everything on AI. Oh, there's a job loss, it's AI, and things like that. All people who lost their jobs are good people. Sometimes people who lost their jobs aren't good at it, and sometimes they are good people. They were just caught up in a bad situation, right? So let's look at some of these other scenarios here. I thought this was quite interesting. This guy, he has a weird name on Twitter, but he posts about finance and kind of careers in general. So there's a post from Macro Edge, which posts finance news. They say Microsoft is reportedly planning thousands of more job cuts, this time aimed at salespeople. And he says, I don't know who needs to hear this, but this is strong evidence that the AI taking our jobs is complete bullshit, right? A complete BS. So what does he mean by this? So he says here, sales disappearing is a demand issue. Now, it's kind of a blunt way of saying it, but what he's saying is we can't blame all these job losses on AI. He's saying less demand, there's going to be less sales and then more layoffs, right? Because companies can't sell enough of their product, whatever that would be. Microsoft selling their particular software. So the point is, right, it's talking about how it's not necessarily an AI issue. If you're cutting sales jobs, a lot of it could be down to just lower demand for their particular products, right? So I think there's lots of issues here. Not everything comes down to AI making the job market more difficult. There's less people in the middle class, less consumer spending, higher interest rates, thoughts of, global conflict horizon, higher production costs because of the inflation, right? No one is spending a lot of money, not only companies, but people. There's a broader sense of hopelessness and stagnation and not growing. And even if you listen to a lot of the rhetoric before 2020, politicians in the UK, US, elsewhere in the West, they would talk about the managed decline. That's a very important phrase. I remember, ministers and in the UK too, managed decline, which means, this kind of seeing in society now, it's like they planned it ahead. They knew what they were doing. They knew that they were making things worse and worse, not only in the job market, but in society in general. So I would say you can't blame everything on AI. And then if we go back to the final clip here from Anastasia, we have a very important lesson about keeping your options open, because she had such a difficult time throughout her job search. She had to go back to her original employer before she took that career break. So she was working at a company called King in the tech space. Then she took a break to start her own tech startup. It didn't work out. She couldn't kind of really find a demand for what she was producing. She goes into all these other job interviews, doesn't work out, and she ends up thankfully getting a job back at her original employer. So, the grass is greener. Sometimes, I talk on the channel about being self-sufficient, being self-employed is good too. But, somebody might be leave an industry and then all of a sudden your self-employment isn't working. You can't find clients. All of a sudden you try to go back into your industry and there's much tougher competition for those jobs. So let's listen to the final clip here.
Be a wasted effort applying to this job. Now the finale, which role did I choose in the end? So after a year of job searching, navigating, doing timelines, endless interviews, and disappointing offers process, I finally had 3 solid options on the table. And at this point, it wasn't just about landing any job. I wanted to choose the right one, especially given my unpleasant experience with a previous endeavor in a startup or a small company. So after everything I've been through in this market, I wanted a role where my skills were valued and my work would have impact, and the company actually knew what to do with the data. After weighing all my options, which was a very challenging decision, there were some offers that had very unique benefits, but still I decided to return back to King, where I started my career after my master's, and I really enjoyed working there. There are a few reasons why I came back to King. So first of all, data is very, very important there. Roles are very important there, especially compared to some other companies that I've been to or what I've heard from other people. A huge problem in many of those companies is that data teams either become like dashboard factories or just become completely irrelevant and unnecessary and unneeded. And at King, that wasn't really the case. Analytics is really deeply integrated into the decision-making process in the company, from developing the product for building features for the games to monetization of those features and analyzing the player behavior. There's a lot of data. It's not just a nice to have thing. It's a really core part of how a company operates. So that kind of gives me a lot of leverage being there in a data role. Second point is that King's culture works for me quite well. I've experienced different companies, environments, different cultures, and I've realized that it makes a plain realization, but it does make a huge difference in how much I enjoy my work. And at King, the structure, the communications, and the way teams collaborate, the way people collaborate just, fits me. On top of that, I think it's also related to culture. I get to work on a cute and wholesome game on Candy Crush, which reaches hundreds of people. I have a lot of data, but there's also a creative and fun aspect to it that makes the work even more engaging. And it's rewarding to see how I can help shape a game that's so many people enjoy. Third reason is actually that I didn't leave because of any problems. When I left King more than 5 years ago, I did that not because I was unhappy, but more because I was curious about what else is out there. I wanted to experience working in smaller companies, try different challenges, and I did that. Now I'm happy to be back.
So, what she's in passing in between talking about going back to her previous employer is how difficult it was for her at startup. She didn't like the environment. There was maybe a lot of chaos, a lack of, and maybe a devaluation of her particular role, which is around this data analyst type of role. So the point I want to make there is around, think carefully about doing, because startups can be a good thing maybe earlier on in your career, or if you're more experienced and if this doesn't work out, you could job hop back to a major company. So it's just this is the people are facing. It's a tough reality. She's having to return to a previous company. It's important, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but if it is possible, try not to burn bridges so you can go back if you need to. The job market can be so bad, right? Even after a career break, right, and 2 job searches in 2024, she just couldn't find anything better. She had to go to a previous company. Now, work culture matters, right? And she mentions, she likes the culture at that particular company. I have career coaching that will help you build power, pay, and freedom in this very difficult job market. Based on my experience, proven that all my strategies have worked for myself countless times during many job searches with lots of my clients. They're all client testimonials on my career control coaching program site if you want to have a look there. I also have a course, right? And the course will help you to build power in the self, mastering office politics and protecting your career. And the lesson that we can learn from that particular course, which is again in the link in description that applies here, is thinking like a strategist and acting like a worker, right? You rise through ranks, you rise of the corporate environment through tactics, not tasks. Focus on timing, influence, and positioning, TIP, to pursue power. Now, it's important for her, we covered briefly in excerpts and in a 2, is she focused on that to a certain extent, right? She wanted to be self-employed, so she took up time away from work. It didn't quite work out for her with her tech startup, so she ended up going back to the job. So she's being strategic with her timing, right? She's thinking about positioning herself in the industry. She could have went for a new company, but it looked like none of the options were best for her. So what she did is she went back to her old company. That's the whole on positioning where you are in your industry. And then influence. She must have built good influence with that previous company, King, to go back and get her job back, right? Rather than have to find another job in a startup which she might not like, as she's kind of indicated here. So these are all covered in my career code course. There's a free ebook which is called 48 Laws of Career Power. I'll help you unlock career secrets to gain power and respect at work. Tons of strategies that you can think about throughout your career. And then there's a free email newsletter, right? Twice a week, Monday and Friday, you get free career advice sent straight to your inbox, which will actually help you, not the advice you might hear elsewhere. So that's everything, but it's mainly the career coaching that will be a game changer for your career and your finances. So let me know what you think about Anastasia's story. What do you think about Eli's advice? Let me know in the comments. 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.